can hold all of our questions to the end. We're
Okay.
going to be
Oh, okay. I guess I'll start with the purpose of this. It's not going to be a step-by-step, here's how you divert streams and rescue fish. It's mainly intended to give information to people who have maybe some oversight on the project biologists, project managers, resident engineers, folks like that. And so if I miss something, it's probably not a big deal. Hopefully I can cram in as much information as possible in the time I have. So I'll just say this from the back just real quick. I'll talk about some of the pictures too while I go there. The previous page was a happy Chinook salmon freely passing up the Mad River. Okay, when you're looking at a location where you're going to have to divert for usually for us a small fish passage project, you're definitely going to want to look at the physical setting, which includes things like depth, width, length of the bypass, the gradient of the stream, the substrate, sometimes the tide. Temperature is really important, both temperature in the stream and the temperature in your buckets that you're holding the fish in. And existing infrastructure can sometimes be a problem. You got to work around things that are already in the stream. And then obviously the kind of flows you're going to have to deal with during the diversion. And I'll just say that's a little steelhead fry from Wachtel Creek. And does anybody know what that is? I'm just curious. There's probably people on the phone yelling on mute, and it's a tailed frog tadpole. So I tried to include some amphibians, even though I'm kind of fish-centric. So if you're gonna finally have your project getting ready to go, and before that happens, put on number one here is review your biological opinion, incidental take statement of the biological opinion, and any other permits you have. Because I've seen a number of times where the people out there that are supposed to be overseeing the project don't really know what the electrofishing crew or the people who are diverting the stream are supposed to be doing. So make sure you review all that ahead of time. Do your planning and reconnaissance. And in this picture here, you can see everybody's kind of looking off in a different direction. This is planning to fix this culvert. Everybody's thinking about something different, presumably. So think about your capture strategies. We'll get to some of those. Your release locations, that's really important. What type of diversion, how long it's going to be, what kind of screening needs you're going to have, how you're going to deal with nuisance water. That's water that sort of comes into the project through groundwater that you're not able to divert. And whether you might want to segment reaches, and we'll talk about that more too. Also, check all your gear, repair it before you get there. Make sure you have good batteries in your bubblers, because next one, sometimes stuff like this happens where you show up and you've got a broken handle on a seine or something. This was actually my fault. I put that seine away about 5 years before this project. And then when somebody finally needed it, they unrolled it. He was not happy. So I took this picture real quick thinking, oh, I can use that in my presentation for the fish pack. It's something not to do. And I ran away. But it worked out okay. But just make sure you check your gear and don't be an idiot and put your gear away broken for the next person. Then you'll also want to make sure that you instruct your contractor, your resident engineer, anybody else who's working on it, to give the biologist time and space, and that includes places to set up their gear, places to park. Just have all that set out ahead of time so you avoid headaches. And while this is happening, the biologists are kind of in charge. If they see something they don't like, the contractors need to know that they need to listen to the biologists. Make sure everybody's ready at the same time. You're going to need the contractor to help you move things, maybe give you some workers to assist with the gravel bags, things like that. And they're going to need patience, because sometimes these dewaterings can take days. I've been on them that have actually taken weeks. So, and they'll be breathing down your throat. So here's a picture of where the contractor is almost literally breathing down our throat while we're electrofishing. But actually, they're just curious. I think for construction people, the only cool thing that biologists do is electrofish. So they're not really breathing down our throat. Okay. Screening. Obviously, you're trying to keep fish out of a reach or get them out, so you don't want them coming in while you're doing this. And so you need to screen. And what's really important is to put your screen in a low velocity area. If you have a pool or it's low gradient, and you can put it in without any help, that's fine. But if it's a little bit fast, you can build a little check dam out of gravel bags or even rocks that are on site. Slow it down, then put your screen in so the fish don't get impinged on the screen. And then you need to monitor that screen. It gets debris on it usually pretty quickly. And as Alan pointed out yesterday, sometimes it can be episodic. You might get a windstorm like we're having today, and then a bunch of leaves will come down all at once. So somebody needs to be monitoring that thing all the time. If it blows out and fish come into your project, then you gotta do it all over again. Okay. So the screening material, the go-to material is usually hardware cloth, which is this sort of heavy-duty screen, but also different types of plastic, and you can use even beach seine type nets. Those will work in some circumstances. If water's slow, for example. And your screen needs to be sized correctly. 1/8 inch is kind of normal. I think this is a 1/8 inch hardware cloth. In some places you might need a little bit bigger, but you should never go above 3/8 of an inch. And those guidelines are in some of the federal guidelines that Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS have. And if you're into millimeters, that's the size in millimeters. And that's really important, is that's measured diagonally. That's not measured up and down. And most people know that that's how you measure screens, but this will happen if you don't do it right. And the problem here was that the people ordered 3/8 inch. The screen came labeled 3/8 inch. Put it in, and fish started getting hung up in it, and realized that it was 3/8 inch up and down, and it wasn't measured diagonally. We measured diagonally, and it was a couple millimeters longer, and just enough. So beware of that. To get the fish out of your area that's going to be dewatered or otherwise worked in, try to herd fish out first. You can do that with beach seine that doesn't have a bag on it, just a straight beach seine. And sometimes it's not that efficient because you've got lots of rocks and stuff, and you can move some of those around. You might have undercut banks, and you can use branches or a dip net to help get fish out of there. But even if you only get a few fish, 10% of your fish, that's worth doing because those are fish you don't have to handle. And it will help you not exceed your take limit if you have that. And I've seen people try to herd fish with an electrofisher, which just don't do that. If you've got an electrofishing crew, and they think it's a good idea that you've got swift water, they're just going to immobilize fish and have them wash downstream. Don't do that. Those fish will recover quickly, bury themselves next to rocks, you'll step on them. I've heard that they'll even come back around, and then you'll run through and you'll hit them again. So just don't do that. We had somebody try that, and they went over their take limit. Okay. So like I said, small percentage of fish is worth it. Start early in the day, and that's going to be something for electrofishing in particular, but for any time you're handling fish, when the water's warm, the fish are under more stress to begin with, especially if you've waited until June or July to do this. The water's going to be pretty warm. Start early in the day. And don't forget the inside of the culvert. You want to block that off like we have here with that seine that had the broken handle. You don't want fish taking refuge up in your culvert, and you also need to get the fish out of the culvert. And some of the guidance I looked at mentioned something called connecting rod snakes. Anybody know what that is? It was quoted as being composed of wood sections approximately 3 feet in length. And I assume that somebody's running those down the culvert and scaring the fish out. But I couldn't find out from anybody what that is. I guess nobody here knows. But one of these days we'll figure out what that is, because if it works, it could be helpful for you to fish out the culvert. Otherwise, it's difficult to do. So actually capturing fish. Now that you've tried to herd fish out, capturing fish, you can catch them in different ways. Beach seine is preferable to electrofishing. So make multiple passes with your beach seine, and some of the guidance recommends 3 passes without catching any fish before you say that the area is cleared, or before you go to electrofishing. Electrofishing is going to be the last resort. We'll talk more about that. Baited minnow traps. Sometimes they work really well. I'm not sure why they do and why they don't sometimes, but here we're putting frozen salmon roe in these minnow traps. And you can just put those out, and the fish will swim into them, and then you can take them out and release them. They're really good when you've got a lot of infrastructure around. You might be on a project where you've got platforms and things you can't get under. You can put minnow traps in some of those places, and that'll help get some of the fish out. Okay. So here's a scenario where you've got a lot of infrastructure, you've got stuff in the way, you've got a work platform, it's really hard to get in there and net. And so electrofishing and minnow traps what we needed to do here. Again, start early in the day for lowest temperatures. You need to follow the guidance that NIMS has and the Department of Fish and Wildlife has on electrofishing. However, I would point out that those guidelines, at least the NIMS guidelines, were set up for research. And you don't want people out there doing research when you're going to hurt fish. But if you're doing a project, you have to build a bridge and the water's a little bit too warm, you can still do it because you've got a Section 7 permit, presumably. Your biological opinion will have already considered that it might be warmer than 18 degrees or 17, whatever it is. So you have to follow those guidelines, but you also have to follow your Section 7 conditions, and they may allow some things that the guidelines don't. Okay. Make sure your electrofishing crew obviously is qualified, and that's one of the things that we talked about yesterday is that you do need to review the resumes of the electrofishing crew to make sure they're qualified, and that's helpful. But it's not always foolproof. I've reviewed resumes that look good on paper, and then you get out there and the crew can't identify the fish, or they've got their settings way too high. They're not taking their conductivity readings to know where you're supposed to set your thing. So they're not all created equal, so it's good to have some oversight. Make sure they do the things that they're supposed to do. Like one of the crews that I had some trouble with, eventually, I guess they got chewed out enough that they became really good. And I would definitely use them, even though they were a little sketchy to begin with. Just keep an eye on them. Ideally, you set your electrofisher to achieve galvanotaxis, also called electrotaxis. It's interesting, the electricity that comes off that actually draws fish towards it. They can't help it, they just swim towards it. And so you don't really need to stun them to be to the point of unconsciousness. If you're good and somebody's really subtle with their anode, you can bring them in and net them without having to knock them out. So that's ideally what you would do. Okay. If you're in swift water, like I said, some people have tried to herd fish out just by shocking them, hoping they go downstream. Don't do that, but if you're electrofishing in a high gradient stream where there's pretty good flow, you can put a soft, like a seine style net downstream, have somebody monitor that, and so if fish do get pinned up against it, you can collect those fish. So that's what it's doing. You should always have at least 3 people. Here we have 2 people, but I took the picture. I was the 3rd person. I just stepped back, took the picture, and went back to work. But if you want at least 3 people, sometimes you're going to need more. You need somebody to carry buckets. You need somebody to make sure all the equipment is close by. So that's also something that some of the project biologists can help out with. You might have an electrofishing crew that's hired by the contractor, but it's a good opportunity for a project biologist to get out there and play with some fish and help out rather than just being in the way. If you're thinking that you might have bigger fish, say you're looking for newly emerged fry, but you think there might be some 2-year-old steelhead in there, be really careful. Start with extra low settings, because the bigger the fish, the more surface area it has, the more the electricity will hit them. And along the lines of that is don't fall in, because if you do, you're a really big fish, and that electrofisher can put the hurt on you. As you're going through, watch where you're stepping, because you have immobilized fish, you may step on them. I've done that. That may be one of the more common ways that fish end up being killed in electrofishing. Don't net with the anode, and that's the little loop that you've got on the electrofisher as you're going along. They used to come equipped with a little section of net on them, so you could just kind of pick the fish up. Until they figured out that was actually exposing the fish to really high levels of electricity. So don't do that. Just make sure you've got somebody who's good with the dip net right there. Record everything in your logbook. We need to know what the conductivity was. We need to know what the temperature was. We need to know what your settings were on the electrofisher, because there are times when too many fish get killed. You go over your take, there's a high percentage of mortality. We need to know what happened. We need to know where your settings were, so we can learn from that and show the crew that, hey, this isn't how you do this. And handle your fish properly, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay. I mentioned you might have to partition the stream, and one of the reasons for doing that is you might have a really deep area, or an area that's really complicated. You can set up nets, you can try to fish that area out, and you can also start to incrementally dewater that area. And these are some of the ones that take a really long time, because you're dewatering, you're trying not to do it too fast. You may not want to put block nets in right away, because as the water comes down, fish will actually volitionally leave. So you might give them a chance to leave. And then if you have to put the block net in, that's fine. And you pump it down with these pumps. What they're doing here, you can see there's no containment under these pumps. It's not a huge deal unless you have to refuel it and spill. So stick them in a kiddie pool like that. Like I said, it may take a long time, and the contractor needs to know that. Good enough. So actually handling the fish, make sure you have all your stuff ready. Like I said before, make sure your bubblers have fresh batteries. You got your buckets, everything together. I like these dark buckets. Try to use dark buckets. These Ace Hardware camo buckets are pretty good. People have done studies and showed that coho are calmer when they have blue plastic that they're in. So if you have a blue bucket, that would be good too. When you handle the fish, make sure your hands are wet. Don't have any lotion on them, bug repellent, or lunch stuff, mayonnaise and ketchup or whatever. Try to be clean. Very important is not to mix the year classes of fish. So don't put 2-year-old steelhead in with a bunch of fry because they will eat them. Also, sculpins, the sculpin here, be real careful with them because they'll eat everything, and they can eat something that's almost the same size as they are. Amazing. Also down here in the lower corner, that's a coastal giant salamander. They'll also eat fish, and they also bite, so be careful with them. Make sure that your temperature is as close as you can in the buckets to what's in the stream, and err on the side of cooler than warmer if you have to. Change your water frequently if there's a temperature problem. Again, early in the day. Be sure to identify all the fish, and hopefully you've got somebody who can do that. We had a project where they identified a bunch of juvenile steelhead as coho, and we thought, oh my God, we've gone over our take limit. And turned out they just didn't identify the fish right once we saw pictures. And don't collect data for fun. Fish biologists, especially somebody who's fresh out of school, they'll think you might have to weigh and measure everything. Don't do it. Just handle them as little as possible. And make sure you identify them correctly. And then where do you release your fish? Obviously not here. This was late in the season. When we first went in to do this, there was water flowing, of course, all the way out down to the Russian River. But this was kind of on an alluvial fan area with really permeable gravels. And later in the season, it all dried up for a couple miles all the way down. In this case, we released fish upstream into a bedrock channel where we were told by the local fish and game people, fish and wildlife people who knew what they were talking about, that the flows are maintained upstream better than they are downstream. That's not always the case, so I guess the main thing here is look at the geology and figure out, well, are we just going to be putting fish down into a death trap, or look upstream. I think upstream is usually preferable if there's going to be water up there because it's above your project, and when you have your project piped and the water's flowing through it, it's pretty easy for the fish to get downstream if they want. Really hard for them to get upstream through most of the bypasses. So have an error on the upstream. And also watch out for predators. This is freshwater lagoon, but you see largemouth bass in almost all the rivers. Russian River, we were looking for a release location, and we saw largemouth bass in one big pool, so we ended up finding some small pools to release the fish in. More considerations for releasing, like I said, generally upstream if the habitat allows. If you have too many fish, you don't want to crowd them, so you may want to go upstream and downstream, split them up a little bit, and you may have to drive for miles with fish in a bucket just to find a good release location. But plan that all out ahead of time and talk to the local experts. Usually there's somebody with the Department of Fish and Wildlife who knows all the creeks in the area. Find that person and see what they think. Yeah, and don't crowd the fish. You can't just dump 100 fish into a little pool and expect them to all live. So move them around. Okay. So actually diverting the stream, there's a lot to consider, and pretty much every site is going to be different. There's some routine things that happen all the time, but you think about this. This is replacing a culvert for fish passage, and they're building a bridge. So the old culvert is still there with the pipe going through it. You're going to have to get that culvert out from around that pipe while there's still water flowing in, and the contractor will be able to do that. But sometimes it can get a little bit awkward. So I say through, around, or over. By through, I mean what we have here. You're just piping right through the site, right through where all the construction is. Around would be trenching, and I've got some pictures of that. You might go around. You might even build some kind of flume. And then over, what I mean by going over is actually pumping the water over, which is kind of the last resort, but sometimes you don't have enough room and you don't have a way to trench, so that's what you got to do. So, like I said, you got to make sure you have room for work. There's a lot of work going on in this tunnel, and it's a fish passage project. The water's going through on the pipes on the side, so they've got room. Other times, with the next one, you need to go around. That worked out well. So again, pumping over or around the site, last resort. You need reliable power. Obviously, if you've got the thing set up to be pumping for months, you need redundant pumps. You need redundant power. Sometimes you're going to end up with a diesel-powered motor that runs a pump. You know, it can fail. Some places they actually have PG&E come in and give them a dedicated line in a fairly remote location so that the pumps would be able to run and then still have a backup. And you shouldn't do this if it fails. There's going to be a disaster. Really, you better find another way. Okay. So this is the beginnings of your basic sort of cofferdam and plastic visqueen cofferdam, and pretty much all the contractors who work in this kind of stuff, they know how to do this. If you've got a contractor who doesn't know how to do this, you're probably going to have a pretty fun season taking care of them. But you start out with the visqueen, put it down, put your first layer of sandbags down, put the pipes in. One thing you'll notice here is there's no water in the creek, but they're building the diversion. You got to be ready for anything. It's kind of an interesting story here that I won't go into, but this contractor thought they were going to get away without having a diversion. Rain was forecast. They put in the diversion. It didn't rain. Better safe than sorry. Okay. This is kind of what a typical upstream gravel bag piped cofferdam will look like. You can see the visqueen has been tucked in, and so everything's going into the pipes, trying to block as much from getting around, but you're still going to have some water that gets around or perks up in the substrate on the other side. And here's one that's a downstream cofferdam, so the pipes are going out. But you can see there's water inside. In this case, it didn't matter, but it's a low gradient stream with a fairly permeable bottom. You may have to deal with that nuisance water with additional pumping, and I'll show some of that in a minute. Something that I've heard about and I haven't experienced myself, and I wanted to say just because I have this picture of this really pretty coastal cutthroat, is watch out for kelps. Supposedly they will balk and not go into your pipe, where other small fish may go ahead and just go right down your pipe and out the stream if they want to. These will balk at the pipes, and so if you're in a stream like we're going to have at probably Little Lost Man Creek, where there could be steelhead coming down from upstream after the diversion's in, watch for that. You know, watch for things happening at the top end of your pipe. Where you have your water come out is important. We've got two cases here where that pipe is in a really good spot. It's going right out into deep water. When a fish comes out of that pipe, it's just going to kind of go right out. The other pipe was flowing up against the rocks. That's less than desirable. It may not be as bad for the fish as it looks. Fish go over waterfalls and things all the time, and they've done a lot of studies on some of the Columbia River dams with what happens when fish go through turbines and pumps and things. And if they're in the water, they're actually pretty well protected. Still, don't do it. It looks really bad, and you could hurt fish. You have to leave that pipe. Something else that works for a dam, if you do it right, is these super sacks. You can fill them with gravel, and they'll seal up. Problem at this site is that they used big cobbles and stuff in the super sacks, so they didn't form a tight seal. Yeah, I think the next picture shows what they ended up doing. They had to build another secondary containment, so the super sacks are there. They built a secondary containment with a bunch of pumps that are pumping the water back up into the pipes. And it was really important because, as you can see, there's fresh concrete being poured down here. And you won't want water contacting that. So they eventually got it to work, but it was a really challenging site. This is the second year on that same project. This is at Cedar Creek and the South Fork Eel tributary. And they built this plywood thing with plastic liner, and it leaked quite a bit, so they had multiple pumps. This is the one where they had to get PG&E to give them dedicated power. They were pumping from below the dam and also out of those barrels, which are perforated at the bottom, so fish can't get in. Everything's got to be screened so you don't pump up any fish. Again, it worked, but some very challenging applications. Something else I wanted to mention, and this isn't the kind of site where you normally be doing fish passage, is that you can partition your work area with these water bladders, or you can use like some other systems like K-rails and things. Do your work on one side and then flip it over and do your work on the other side, where you don't actually have to de-water the whole stream. That might be something you would do if you were trying to get rid of a concrete apron, or you have some grouted RSP or something in the channel below the bridge. You might be able to do it without actually putting it through a pipe. So yeah, deal with what I hear people call nuisance water. that the official term? Nuisance water? It's kind of a nuisance when you keep having water come up where it needs to be watered. So you'll want pumps that pump that out. Those pumps need to be screened. They need to be placed in an area where there aren't any fish or amphibians or anything. And so one solution here was put a piece of corrugated metal pipe in and then pump out of that, get it in the ground, give it a little bit of a sump. Probably help contain turbidity while digging it out and keep things from getting in. That's one way to do it. Here you can see too, this is that same one. They put in all these electric pipe pumps to pump that nuisance water out. So there's a lot of pumping. You pump it right back upstream again if the water's clean. They were actually pumping right back into the pipes that we're diverting. If the water's not clean, you might need to pump it into a sediment basin or a baker tank or something that'll hold the water. That's something you're going to want to talk to the water board about in your permits. When you take everything out, there's some things to consider. And the funny thing is as many times as I've been on projects where they're putting it in, I've been on very few where I'm actually there when they're taking it out. And I don't know if that's the case for everybody. Everybody gets excited about putting it in and taking it out. Less oversight. But you want to be careful not to have the water, like in this project, it's a Cedar Creek project again. It ponded up quite a bit of water behind it. And if they just would have blown that thing out or taken it out, the water behind it would have dropped too fast. You could strand fish, plus a bunch of water would have gone downstream, potentially flushed fish or caused erosion. Not in this case, but in some cases it would. So some of the guidance I read says 1 inch per hour, which seems really slow. That'd be great. You might go a little bit faster depending on particular conditions. Okay. And then you're going to end up with probably a very heavily disturbed stream bed. And it may have a lot of fines mixed into it. So what has happened here is it's still the original native material that's there. But because of all the work that was going on, all the fines have been brought up and mixed to the top. So what we had to do was take a water truck down there and just spray it down. And that helps get some of the fines off the top, sequesters it down into the bottom. So when the first water comes through there, it's not quite as turbid. And it also makes it look nice for when the water board or whoever comes out and inspects. It doesn't look like you've got a huge silt problem. You've actually got some rocks and surface. And then I always like to throw this picture in because it shows an innovative way of not having to pipe a stream or divert it. The original plan here, this is Hurdy-Gurdy Creek on Smith River, was to have multiple pipes, 3 or 4, big area of gravel fill put in. And the contractor came along and said, I got a better way to do it. We built these just these sections of big, I think they're 10 foot, might be 8 foot, maybe bigger than they look. And they can go in pretty well. They move some of the rocks around and put some gravel bags in. They don't have to be completely level, but the gravel they put inside has to be level, and so that's where they focus. And this was holding up false work on a bridge, and it's very important that your false work remains stable. And so I think it's pretty stable. Somebody asked yesterday if you would put live traffic on top of something like this, or build a work platform out of something like this. That's a question for an engineer. I don't know, but it could be good for fish. And sorry if it's too close to lunch. We started with this yesterday, and I think people were kind of vomiting in the back of their throat. But this is what happens when you mess up. We didn't actually go over our take limit on this. It was a big project with a lot of fish, but this was because screens weren't the right size, and lots of fish got stuck in it. So avoid this nightmare. Okay. So here's a place where they did not have room to install the culvert and remove the old culvert and do their work. And so they had to trench around. So we had them build this trench, put the pipe in, build a little channel to divert the water into the pipe, block the stream with a water bladder. Those things are pretty handy in a lot of places. And then, of course, on the downstream side, you need some kind of energy dissipation, something to keep it from scouring out. And so we had them build this little basin with rocks to slow the water down before it went back into the stream.